you ask me how much I know about Cary history, I would say not enough.
Cary's changed so much. I mean, there's a lot to talk about.
To tell history and show history to our future generations is very important.
I don't even remember ever learning anything about Cary in school.
So I wouldn't say it's just a good thing to do. I say it's essential to do.
And those of us that know the story should tell the story.
So we need to have a documentary about Cary. We need to put it out there who we are and why we are.
If you know where you come from, your history, you feel grounded. And I think that's very important.
From what we can tell, the first people who lived in this area were Native Americans approximately 2000 BCE. The Tuscarora, who we really see mention of starting in the 1500s, primarily were on the eastern part of North Carolina and Virginia. And they used this area, it was more of a hunting grounds. So in 1711, we basically see the end of the Tuscarora living as they had traditionally in North Carolina. And that's when the Tuscarora War happens, between 1711 and 1714. Essentially, they lost their autonomy. There was reservations, things like that actually started being set up. And we know that by the 1760s, the Tuscarora had completely left the area.
Start to see settlers come into this area like late 1720s. It picks up steam in the 1740s and 50s. It becomes really a land rush into this area.
The first settler in this area was a man named Francis Jones who had a land grant.
He purchased a large section of land over near where Lake Crabtree is. He had a son named Nathaniel who became known as Crabtree Jones. Then there was another family named Jones, not related, who also had a patriarch named Nathaniel.
Nathaniel Jones of Crabtree Creek ended up with a huge plantation that covered what is now, today, the entire west side of Cary. And then Nathaniel Jones of White Plains had a 10,000 acre plantation, which is now covers the entire east side of what is today's Cary. So both of these plantations had many, many, many slaves.
So we really think of Cary's origin, we can trace it back to this place called Bradford's Ordinary. And we think that the Bradford's Ordinary was basically just a truck stop for colonial travelers in the 18th century. And it was a place where you could feed your horses, get something to eat, maybe have a bed, and keep on traveling. So we think this was established around 1750, which is the earliest documented settlement of this area.
The Yates family migrated from Virginia in the 1760s, 70s, 80s timeframe. William Yates Sr. was the head of the family who settled at the border of Wake and Chatham County near the Mount Pisgah Church.
The first Arrington that moved here, I do believe his name was Alfred, was the early 1800s. They bought land over on the other side of Highway 54. I'm thinking that he was a farmer because most of the people that were here in the early 1800s, they bought land and they started farms.
In 1840, there were 8,000 slaves in Wake County.
Before the Civil War, Wake County is basically about 33% slave.
There were certainly slaves that were owned by some of the wealthier families with the larger land holdings here in Cary.
We hear that White Plains Jones, even in the 1830s, wanted to free all of those who were enslaved on his plantation. Laws were implemented against that, carrying forward.
That was well before the Civil War, and so we do know that about Nathaniel Jones of White Plains.
The story of Cary is about the trains. Remember the trains. Prior to the trains arriving in Cary, we had a little dusty oak crossroads that went from Raleigh to Chatham County that was really a path for drovers to take their animals from Chatham County and drive them into Raleigh for market. The Bradfords were gone. There's a house, there's land there that's owned by the Yates family, and there is a smart businessman. His name is Allison Francis Page, Frank Page.
Frank was a tall, imposing man, dark hair and a large, dark beard. He was an ardent temperance man, a Methodist. He was an entrepreneur. We know that, again, he was a lumberman, but he also eventually had a dry goods store and would eventually build the Page Walker right after the second railroad line came through.
His wife, Catherine, was very well educated, and she made sure that her children were educated. And of course, the most influential, I think, of her children was Walter Hines Page.
So all of a sudden, this railroad comes through. There's a stop there. Now, people are bringing cotton and tobacco and lumber are coming on and off at this station. It's really not even a station. There's not a depot for years. It's really just in front of Frank Page's house. He's selling off the 300 acres into lots for people to build on. And he's clearing all the trees, and he builds a lumber mill that operates 24/7. And he's milling all this lumber and shipping it out on the train, going east, going west. And so without that train coming through in 1854, Cary might have just stayed a dusty crossroads.
When we think about the Civil War in Cary, it is a Civil War battlefield. On April 13th, as the Confederate Army vacates Raleigh and starts retreating west, they drive right through Cary. Walter Hines Page, as a young man, remembers watching these great armies surge past his house. He remembers watching them. And his house is occupied in the coming days as these armies stay in place. The emancipation experience in Cary was basically not much of a conversation. We had the incredible arrival of 30,000 Union soldiers who brought freedom with them.
The slave schedule of 1860 shows that Frank Page enslaved 4 people.
We do know that there is an interesting story about Kate and how she felt about the Civil War, because there was great hardship, of course, at the conclusion of the Civil War, and took the Confederate currency and made it into curtains.
So in 71, Frank incorporated the town.
Frank Page was the first postmaster.
He was a major part of having the Methodist Church be established in Cary. He actually sold land to the Baptists, who were the other group of people in town.
He donated the land and the lumber to build a school for his children, and it was originally called Cary Academy, and it stood at the head of Academy Street. That's where the street got its name. People of means sent their children to Cary, which was tiny, tiny place, to go to school there.
Frank was indeed the man who was responsible for Cary being called Cary, and he gave it that name when he became postmaster. Frank went on to establish Cary as a town in 1871. He wanted us to be called Cary, and he saw to it that it was made official. So who was Samuel Fenton Cary? He was a gentleman from Ohio. Before and after the war, went around the country giving talks and lectures about the evils of alcohol. So that was what called him to Frank Page's attention, and was why we are referred to as Cary today. By the late 1860s, early 1870s, logging already was getting to the point where they had to go farther and farther out into North Carolina in order to find timber for them to be able to log. In fact, that is one of the reasons why Frank determined that he was going to go down to the Sandhills region, with one of his sons and set up a logging concern down there, which resulted in the family moving to that area and establishing Aberdeen. Did the town fall apart after the Pages left? No, not really. There were others that stepped up. The Walkers had bought the hotel from the Pages and continued to run it for a number of years. About the same time that Frank was leaving town, you had Robert Harrison establishing his wagon works and farm machinery company at the intersection of West Chatham Street and Harrison Avenue. Harrison established a fairly robust company, up to 75 employees, which made it one of Wake County's largest employers.
Some of the folks that were able to pass for white and able to buy land during that time frame, Clyde Evans would sell small parcels of that land down Evans Road to other African Americans to give them housing ownership opportunities.
Education has always been the heart of Cary.
In 1871, Frank Page wanted his children educated and others educated, so he built the first schoolhouse on the property where the Cary Arts Center is now.
Initially called the Cary Academy, then called Cary High School, then it evolved into becoming even Cary Elementary for a while. Now known as, of course, the Cary Arts Center.
It had a rocky start. There were a series of short-term principals until Marcus Dry came to be a longtime principal from 1908 up to the early 1940s. He was a trendsetter in education in North Carolina. They had an agricultural and farm life school, a home economics department, a commercial department for business, and also a teacher's training department, and made Cary a real magnet for parents who wanted their children to be educated.
For the black community, even previous to the Civil War, education was important. Where do our children get the opportunity and just rewards from education?
So the first black school in Cary opened in 1877. And then in 1895, the Cary Colored School was built and opened.
Dr. John W. Meadows. My great-grandfather was a principal, and my great-grandmother was a teacher at the old Negro Colored School in Cary as well.
He was the principal and teacher there from 1900 to 1935 when he retired. In 1907, Cary became the first publicly funded school in the state of North Carolina.
Cary is considered to be the first public high school in North Carolina. There were several schools at the time who had been, I guess, invited to become a public high school, and I think Cary got its papers in first.
Walter Hines Page, or Watt Page, was born right here in Cary in 1855.
Writer, editor, a man of letters who went on to be the ambassador to the Court of St. James to England during World War I.
A major publisher, the first Southern editor of the Atlantic magazine.
You know, he was one of the original founders of Doubleday. Doubleday Page, the publishing house, received many imprints of many books with Doubleday Page. He was a big advocate for education for everyone.
A man of letters, he was an incredible personality in his own right.
Probably our best known farm is Kildare Farm. Kildare Farm by 1942 had 1,500 laying hens and 150 dairy cows. So that was still, farming was still important. Here we are in the World War II era, and farming is still an important part of Cary.
Our farming operation with the Upchurches started in about the Civil War time when one of our relatives married the widow Horton. What was life like back then? You would wake up and either go to school or go outside and work on the farm. Our neighbors were like family to us. All the opportunities that we have in the world now, they were a whole world away. And so we relied on each other, and it made it a very special time.
1963, Henry Adams was the pharmacist in Cary. He put together a team of people who developed a plan to be the first school in Wake County to desegregate. And they picked Cary High School on Walnut Street. In the fall of 1963, 6 girls were brought over from Barry O'Kelly High School, and they desegregated Cary High.
Cary can be proud of the fact that members of the black and white community did come together when it came to desegregating Cary schools.
However, right before those girls arrived at Cary High School, the old first Green Hope High School in the middle of the summer was burned to the ground. And it has always been assumed that that was done so that that school would not be desegregated.
There was still the demand that in order to get equal education, all children need to be in the same classrooms.
Did that go smoothly? No. Did it eventually work out? Of course, obviously it did.
Desegregation, yes, it happened here in Cary, but just like everywhere else, it took even more time.
I didn't know what the park was back then. I was in elementary school or grade school. But in 1965, I started remembering these kids that were moving in from New York, Wisconsin. And you know, when you're a small town, you know everybody. You grow up with everybody. Then all of a sudden you're seeing other kids in your class when you're in the 5th grade. Where are you from? Who is this guy? And they're moving here and they're working for IBM. So I didn't know what IBM was back then.
The secret to Cary's development really comes in the late 1950s. This little experiment called the Research Triangle Park was an incredible endeavor by North Carolina's leaders to diversify.
It was designed as a research park, so a lot of the companies that ended up locating there were doing mainly research.
It had been agriculture, been manufacturing, but after World War II, they saw a real need to harness the power of the universities in Raleigh and Durham and Chapel Hill.
So they heard about this thing called Stanford Research Park, which was the first research park in the United States. So they headed out to California. The idea of Stanford Research Park to create a venue for the commercialization of intellectual property that was created on campuses really sparked this group of people.
Cary also ends up in the middle of places that all did pretty well.
We are now surrounded by US 1, 40, 540, and 64. So let's call it the technology highway.
Cary did a very intentional job and successful job in the 70s and 80s of embracing the idea of live, work, play communities.
Cary benefited a lot from the Research Triangle because Cary became sort of a bedroom community.
Bedrooms to boardrooms. Back in the 60s is when that kind of transformed our community. Now in the 70s and 80s is when we started transforming.
So as the park became successful recruiting businesses in the local community, they recognized that these were international companies. These were not companies simply selling products, goods, and services in Cary. They were selling them domestically in the United States, but selling products all over the world. The combination of the Research Triangle Foundation, the park, and the airport, those two coming together, really were a very good marriage that came together that helped this community, especially Cary, actually grow.
Right place, right time. IBM at a time when it started to grow, and then just kept going.
But this whole idea of attracting companies to come and do research work here helped us grow in the tech areas.
We attract people from all over the world that look at this location and say, this is a great place to live and a great place to raise your family. Matter of fact, myself, I live in the town of Cary, and I picked it specifically because the quality of life features they've got.
But the park, the airport, the whole triangle base is our foundation.
I think it's very important for Cary to have a thriving and active arts and cultural community. It helps us integrate as a community. We're sharing each other's cultures, we're sharing each other's views, and that helps people understand each other a little better. Diamante, when we first began, it began with the Latino Diamante Awards. Then we went to the Three Kings Day and the Ritmo Latino Festival.
Education, art and culture, they go hand in hand, right? You know, we had our first Dragon Boat festival here at the Cocoa Boot Amphitheater. In the first year, we had about 2,000-3,000 people coming out.
So HumSub is a cultural organization, and part of that is to share the cultural experiences that of Indian community. So we started with a small Diwali program. The first time, a little more than 2,000 people, and the last one we had last year, we had about 15,000 people. So what established for us is that there's appetite, cultural appetite in this city. But people want to experience different culture, different food, different art. So there is a diversity that people are very much interested, and we need to bring this in.
My name is Howard Manning. I'm honored to serve as the Executive Director for Dorcas Ministries. Our official name is Christian Community in Action. Dorcas Ministries is the oldest nonprofit human service agency in the town of Cary. We help people in need of financial crisis assistance. We have one of the best food pantries in Wake County. Dorcas was started in 1968 by a very ambitious group of women that were led by a lady out of First United Methodist Church by the name of Margaret Keller. She had this vision that churches working together could have more impact on our community than each church working alone. But getting black churches, white churches, Baptists, people of different political persuasions, even some Jewish synagogues, to work together toward a common goal or providing help when it counts was quite a feat.
My name is Corinna Smith. I'm a senior in high school and I go to Green Hope High School. I have been involved with Cary Teen Council since 7th grade. Cary Teen Council basically helps out with a lot of different events throughout Cary, Raleigh, and the surrounding area. Even sometimes we'll have events in Durham. We do socials, we do lock-ins. One of the major things that I think members get is kind of the independence. You know, their parents don't follow them to an event. Their parents aren't there doing the work for them. Cary Teen Council has about 950 members. We are huge.
How many miles of greenway do we have in Cary?
In the town of Cary, there is a lot of greenway.
I would like to say there are hundreds because I've walked all over them, 100 plus.
300.
600 miles.
My name is Harold Weinbrecht Jr. and I'm the mayor of Cary. We have 80 miles of greenway, close to 90 miles of greenway.
When I walk them, it feels like 600.
What's the population of Cary?
Total population.
120,000?
8 million.
Well, the population of Cary is about 225,000.
Million now, maybe?
I believe the population of Cary is around about 160,000.
No, it can't be a million. That's ridiculous.
We're right around 170,000 people that live in Cary now.
How many firehouses are there in Cary?
How many fire stations does Cary have?
7 or 8 firehouses in Cary.
20.
20 fire stations?
There are 9. Are there 9 firehouses?
There are 9 firehouses in Cary, I believe. The newest one is on Walnut Street.
I was spot on, really?
Is Cary a bedroom community, a suburb of Raleigh?
That's a good question. Is Cary a bedroom community?
Is Cary a suburb to Raleigh and Durham? We are not.
I think it's in a state of transition. Just as many people come into Cary to work as leave Cary.
I feel like Cary is looked at as a suburb, but I also feel like Cary is not really playing second to anyone, but is sort of its own.
I think it was in the 1960s and 1970s. I don't think it is anymore. And the way that I can say that is because I can entirely live my life without ever going to Raleigh, without ever going to Durham.
People can say, I'm from Cary, and people will know where that is, not I'm from Raleigh, meaning Cary.
We have been able to produce a community here that is self-sustaining in every aspect, from quality jobs to housing to business retail, and how it is only getting started.
We got the little sister syndrome, I guess, but I think we're in the big leagues now.
Is Cary a city or a town?
In my family, we debate this all the time.
I think that Cary is a town.
I mean, by the numbers, it's a city.
But I feel like Cary is a town.
I think Cary is a city.
Well, yeah, what makes a town? What makes a city?
I think we call it a town because we want to keep that homey feeling.
It's like a little cosmopolitan town that has everything you need that a big town has.
Right now, it's still, to me, a town, but it is fast approaching city life.
We want to keep that hometown perspective, and we want to keep that kind of charm that attracted us to Cary years ago.
I've always known us as the town of Cary, and I think we've been able to build a wonderful city out of it.
What concerns me about the future of Cary?
So what concerns me about Cary's future, we're losing the natural habitat.
I do feel like it's moving in a direction of bigger is better, and
the fact that we only have 15% or so of available land to develop, which means that in our future, and it's happening now, most of the development will be redeveloped.
Making sure that we have the infrastructure to support our population.
Obviously, having a farm in the middle of Cary, there is some nervousness. We actually want to stay agriculture as long as we can.
Making sure that Cary continues to be equitable for all people, that we're not essentially a gated community.
I just hope that Cary doesn't change too fast.
What's Cary like in 100 years? Cary will be a bustling city.
Much bigger, a lot of tall buildings, more densely populated.
I think growth is just a fact of life out here.
This is still going to be a technology town.
So in 150 years, will Cary have flying cars?
If anybody is going to have the flying cars, it's going to be Cary.
I think it will keep growing. I think it will be still the place that drew my great-grandfather here.
The next 150 will be right there, cutting edge as we are now.
I think it's going to be amazing looking. I really do.
I like living in Cary because you can find your own path no matter what that path might be.
If you ask me what's so special about Cary, the diversity.
It's unique in the fact that there are people here from all over the world.
I've got to meet a lot of interesting people that grow up from different areas or even different countries.
What is my favorite thing about Cary?
I like getting outdoors. I like bird watching.
The open air, the blue sky is beautiful. You know, there are so many parks in Cary.
I think the governance is probably a major contributor to Cary being the great place that it is.
The people who are in town government, the mayor and the town council, love Cary and want the best for it.
Town city government is also very open to have the local citizens involved in things.
You know, you have all these great city amenities, but yet it feels like a small community.
Cary is a wonderful place to raise a family. I raised 5 girls.
Children can go out and play all day long. They feel safe and secure.
You name it. I mean, Cary got it.
And I think in Cary,
You know, the vibrancy here is just amazing to me.
I used to visit Cary when I would come for a trip to the beach. I'll never forget The impression you get when you come into Cary is you can see instantly how thoughtfully planned it was. And I can still remember that day because I remember saying to myself, I would love to work here someday.
Cary is a place where you feel like you've moved home.
Throughout my entire life, I have never felt I found where I belonged until I arrived here in Cary.
"150 years from now, I'll still be here at the chamber."
Okay, this is where I need my notes.
I'm on TV.
It's pretty deep.
You could cut me all out. Believe me, I won't mind.